The South China Sea, beautiful, vast, and mysterious, is now one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Beneath its calm blue waters lies a story of power, pride, and control. A story that has drawn in two nations, the Philippines and China, into one of the biggest geopolitical battles of our time. It is not just about water or islands. It's about national identity, survival, and the future of Asia itself. The question is simple. Who truly owns the South China Sea? The Philippines calls it the West Philippine Sea. China calls it their ancient territory, marked by a sweeping claim known as the Nindash Line. This line, drawn by China on maps, cuts across almost 90% of the sea crossing into areas claimed by the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia. To many, it's just a line. But to millions of people who depend on the sea for food and livelihood, it's a matter of life and death. For decades, Filipino fishermen freely sailed through these waters, casting their nets near reefs and shoals that had fed generations before them. But everything changed when China began to assert control. Ships bearing the red flag started appearing in places that were once peaceful fishing grounds. Tensions rose as Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels began blocking, ramming, and chasing away Filipino boats. The Philippines, smaller and less equipped, suddenly found itself standing up to one of the world's most powerful nations. In 2012, a standoff erupted at Scarborough Shoal, a rocky outcrop just 120 miles from the Philippine coast. Chinese and Filipino ships faced each other for weeks. Eventually, after a series of diplomatic talks, Philippine vessels withdrew, but China didn't. Since then, Chinese ships have remained there permanently, controlling access to the area and preventing Filipinos from returning. It was a humiliating loss for the Philippines, but it sparked something bigger: a fight, not on the sea, but in the courts. The Philippines took China to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, arguing that China's Nindash Line had no legal basis under international law. It was a bold and risky move for a small country to challenge a global superpower. But in 2016, the court ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines. The decision stated that China's historical claims were invalid, and that the areas within the Philippines, exclusive economic zone 200 nautical miles from its coast, belonged to the Philippines. For a brief moment, hope filled the air. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But China rejected the ruling completely. Instead of backing down, it doubled down. Satellite images began showing new artificial islands, giant bases built from dredged sand and coral, complete with runways, ports, and missile systems. What were once tiny reefs now looked like military fortresses rising from the sea. The South China Sea was transforming not into a shared resource, but into a heavily armed battleground. China said it was protecting its sovereignty. The Philippines said it was being bullied, and the rest of the world watched as the sea became a test of power between democracy and dominance. Every day, Filipino fishermen risked their lives sailing into disputed waters. They know that if they're caught by Chinese ships, they could be harassed, their catch confiscated, or worse, forced to leave. Many have videos showing massive Chinese Coast Guard ships firing water cannons or blocking their boats. Some of these ships are so large that one collision could sink an entire fishing vessel. But despite the danger, the fishermen return, driven by the simple need to feed their families. Their courage has become a symbol of resistance. To them, the sea is not just territory, it's home. Meanwhile, the Philippine government faces an impossible challenge. How do you protect your people without starting a war? Presidents have taken different paths. Under President Rodrigo Duterte, the Philippines softened its stance, hoping for better relations with China through diplomacy and investment. Billions of dollars in promises were made, but few truly arrived. Many criticized Duterte for being too friendly with Beijing, accusing him of selling out national interests. Then came President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who took a different approach. Under Marcos Jr., the Philippines began rebuilding military ties with the United States, its oldest ally. Joint patrols were resumed, defense agreements expanded, and access to more military bases was granted to American forces. For China, this was seen as provocation. For the Philippines, it was protection. In the modern world, the South China Sea is not just a regional issue, it's global. More than a third of all international trade passes through its waters, worth over $3 trillion every year. The sea also holds vast reserves of oil and gas, resources that could fuel economies for generations. Whoever controls it controls one of the world's main arteries of power and commerce. That's why this battle isn't just about the countries, it's about influence, freedom, and control. The United States, Japan, Australia, and European nations have all expressed support for the Philippines and called for freedom of navigation. They fear that if China gains full control, it could restrict movement, dictate trade routes, and expand its military reach far beyond its borders. On the other hand, China insists it is merely reclaiming what has always been theirs, citing maps and ancient records, but international law doesn't agree. The 2016 ruling is still valid and recognized by most nations. The problem is, there's no way to enforce it without conflict. Every month brings new reports of confrontations at sea. In some cases, Chinese vessels use water cannons against Philippine Coast Guard ships. In others, they deploy lasers to blind Filipino sailors. It's a dangerous game of intimidation, one that could easily spiral out of control. But even in the face of all this, the Filipino spirit remains unbroken. In coastal villages across Luzon and Palawan, fishermen still paint the Philippine flag on their boats. They sail into the waters, defying fear, asserting that these seas are part of their nation. Their bravery has become a form of quiet resistance, reminding the world that sovereignty is not just about armies, it's about people. Behind the politics, this conflict is deeply human. It affects livelihoods, families, and generations. The fish that once filled the markets are now harder to find. Coral reefs are dying from dredging and military construction. The environment is suffering in silence. The South China Sea, once a cradle of life, is slowly turning into a graveyard of nature. Yet, despite all this, hope remains. Diplomacy continues, and talks between nations still happen, even if progress is slow. The Philippines continues to call for peace, urging all countries to respect international law. The world supports this call, but real peace will require more than words. It will require courage, patience, and unity. Only among leaders, but among the people who depend on the sea for their future. Many experts say that the battle for the South China Sea is a symbol of the 21st century. It's not just about who owns a few reefs, it's about what kind of world we want to live in. A world ruled by Meteor One, guided by law. A world where small nations can stand equal beside great powers, or one where strength decides everything. The story of the Philippines versus China is still being written. Each day brings a new chapter, new clashes, new negotiations, new alliances, and each day the stakes grow higher. The South China Sea is not just a map or a maritime boundary. It's the beating heart of Asia. The decisions made here will echo for generations, as ships circle, as politicians debate, and as fishermen sail into uncertainty. One truth remains. This is not merely a battle for territory, it's a battle for dignity, for justice, and for the right of every nation to stand free. The waves of the South China Sea carry more than trade and treasure. They carry the dreams of millions who believe in fairness and peace. The world watches, holding its breath, as two nations face each other across the water. Will the Philippines and China find a way to coexist, or will this sea, filled with both beauty and danger, become the spark that ignites something far greater than anyone can imagine? The answer lies not in the hands of generals, but in the choices made by those who value peace over power. Because in the end, the true battle is not just for the South China Sea, it's for the soul of the future itself.